haven't I?
Matthew 16:13-20.
Okay.
And it says, when Jesus came into the coasts of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, who do men say that I am, the Son of Man? Am. And they said, some say that thou art John the Baptist, some Elias, and others even Jeremiah, one of the prophets. He says unto him, but whom say ye that I am? And Simon Peter answered and said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God.
Thank you.
To 20.
Did you go to 20?
Mark 17. And Jesus answered and said unto him, blessed art thou, Bar Simon Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. And I say also unto thee, that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatsoever thou hast bind up on earth shall thou bind in heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt loose up in earth shall be loosed in heaven. 20 and last. Then charged his disciples that they should tell no man that he was Jesus the Christ. Amen.
Thank you. I'm just going to give you a synopsis of what's going on there. Even in Mark, this is picked up again, where Jesus is asking them, who do you say I am? Why did Jesus need to ask his disciples who he was? Why does anyone think that would have even been a question? Not you, Sister Dunwell. Why would Jesus feel he's been moving with this crew for a long time? You young people, you know your friends. You know who each other are. Why would a friend need to turn around and say to you, who do you say I am? Why do you think that might have been? Because they were not converted. That's one idea, Gabriel. Why do you think Jesus would have needed to ask? And if you don't answer me, I'll call you out. Why do you think that might have been? To clarify who he is, or who he thought they might see him as? Maybe? The perception. If you recall, this was just before Jesus was going to be crucified. And so he needed clarity from those closest to him. Do you understand what's going to happen here? No. Do you understand who I am? No. Who? Some said John the Baptist. Some said Paul. They didn't know who he was. And even Peter, who came up with the right answer, still went on to deny him. So quite often, our identity or our understanding of who we are or who each other are can be bound up simply in what we see on Sabbaths. How many times would you say, I got a friend at church, and you don't see the friend all week? You don't see them for months, and if you don't come to church, you don't see them. How many people in church really know each other, or just know of each other, or just know your name, or just know who your children might be, or just know, but you don't know who I really am, because you have not made inquiry beyond what you've seen. And I challenge you today that if there's one thing perhaps that you might want to consider in leaving here today, is that when you say, let us greet somebody in Jesus' name, you likewise say, and what is your name? And where are you from? Who are you? Because happy Sabbath is just not going to cut it quite often when I'm going through it during the week and you don't know anything more than perhaps my name, if I'm lucky enough for you to know that. So Jesus was doing something that he needed to do in order to gain clarity. Who is on the Lord's side? Let him stand by me. Who is he? Who is it going to be? Can I count on these people in the day of my trial? Can I count on these people when stuff gets really difficult? Young people, can you count on the guy sat next to you or the girl sat next to you when it really starts to kick off at school, at college, in the streets? Who is it that is going to stand by you and identify with you. So Jesus was asking that question. And it made me think, we don't really need to always beat ourselves up about often not knowing those answers. And this today, like I said earlier, was a message for the young people, of whom quite a few are not in the room just now, because the conversation was really to be with them. But that's okay. We were all young once, weren't we? And for those who are not quite as young as the teenagers, we can still learn. I'm a consummate learner. I didn't know I was a consummate learner because I grew up in a family where everything was in macro terms. Nobody really drilled down to asking you questions on your own. It was all my children, my brothers and sisters. Everything happened in macro terms. So it's difficult to know who you are at 15, 16, 17 in a family that is constantly in survival mode more than this is in the 70s. So, we're in survival mode. We're getting through. We're navigating all sorts of pressures that are taking place outside, out there. So it's difficult to kind of understand who you are, what makes you who you are. And so I was surprised that I became a consummate learner, somebody who had a hunger for knowledge. And I always consider myself a late starter. So when everyone was going off to uni, I didn't go. I wanted to work. I was of a generation that if you weren't working and getting your own money, then you were not going to have freedom and liberty in the way that you would want it, because your parents were just not going to hand it out to you to do whatever you wanted to do it with. Vastly different to the world now, where children will get an allowance. My son didn't get any kind of allowance. He ain't getting no allowance because, he's a byproduct of the life I had. So, I didn't know. And so I spent many years wondering what and who I was. I was a subtext of my parents and a subtext of the people who I met in church and my peers. I didn't really form any real identity until I left home. And I started to forge a way ahead in a world that didn't know me and I didn't know them. I remember saying to my dad many years later, "You spent a long time preparing us for heaven, but you forgot to prepare us for earth." And so there were so many things we just couldn't have known because we were on permanent lockdown. We're girls in a preacher's house. We're girls in a leader's house. And so you just did what the leader and church members, let's face it, I don't know if you have that still, but church members were accountable for us. So if we met them in Tottenham High Street and you were supposed to be in school, just saying, and you weren't in school, then there's a good chance Auntie Pat would call Dad and say, "Did I not see one of your children in Woolworths today or on the high road today?" And Dad would say, he would come and he would say, "So how was school today?" I would say, "Yeah, good. Yeah." He said, "Not been out and about?" Because my exit was always library. "Where you been?" "Library." And that was cool. "Library? Where you going?" "Netball." "Who you with?" "Cousins who lived up the road." But the community, the church community, was accountable for us. And therefore, you simply did what the church community and the community around you, endorsed by your parents, took accountability for you. And so I didn't really know what direction I was exactly going. I knew it was education, education, education. I knew it was somewhere out there. I knew it was Adventism, and I knew it was church, but I didn't know much beyond that. And I don't think that differs much for the young people now. I don't think for now it differs much. Having gone around various places and spoken to various groups, I hear the same stories, and I'm thinking, wow, we're a few years on from those stories. Not even years, it's decades since those stories and those ways of being have been circulating. And I thought it was just about me. I thought it was just me and my sisters. I just thought it was us who were experiencing some of the things we were experiencing. And they're not all bad. They just mean they shape you in a certain way that you're not always sure that represents you. So in this slide, which I've been trying to get up because it's a long way from me, and I'll move across just so that I can see it properly. Yes. So in this slide, the illustration is very simply that your starting point, young people, this was for you. Your starting point is not, and the journey that you take is not always as black and white as you may feel it to be. And how you lay those foundations in order to gain maximum opportunity later down the line is what is important. And the Bible is clear. And it helps in so many ways. When Matthew here it's saying, for where your treasures are, what are your treasures? Who has treasures? What do you consider treasure? What would you consider a treasure, Elder Charles? What would be your greatest treasure? Your Bible. I would go a little further and press you just a little more. Is there any treasures beyond that you might consider important? Hold that thought. I can see you looking at me. What sort of treasures would you say you have?
Well, my wife.
Your wife is your treasure. Did you hear that? Who are the married people in the house? His wife is his treasure. Okay, that's good. You're going to stay married a while. Anybody else? What other treasures do we have in the room? I can't. Children. Absolutely. Your children. Well, some might disagree, Sister Maureen. She's saying, my children. And she has some lovely children and grandchildren. So we watched them grow up, Sarah and David and Jonathan. We watched them, beautiful children that she has, very, very, to be proud of. But what about when you're not so proud of your children? How does that feel? Do they feel like treasures to you? Are they still a treasure? Yes, still a treasure, even with the pain, still a treasure. And you know it's true, even with the pain of the things that they would do. And in this, if you have a millennial like I do, you know, or a Gen Z as they call them, anyone between the age of 15 and 25, then it might be a struggle. And guess what? You get to inherit, so you get to get some new children in your grandchildren. And then they come along and can be another trigger and a constant reminder. And you're sort of like, I've been through this. How is this now something that I'm supposed to embrace? But the Bible says, what does it say? In Matthew 6:21, for where your treasures are, there will your heart be also. So it's great, Elder Charles, that your Bible is your treasure, because I know if there's a sinking ship, what you're going to reach for first, it could be your Bible, but the chances are it may be your children. If you don't have children, it could be other children, other people's children. It could be your grandchildren. My son says to me, Mum, when I have children, I'm bringing them to you. I said, no, you're not. Bring them where? for me to have to suffer all over again, really? He said, because you did such a great job, so I want you to do this. I don't think my wife is going to be able to do what you can do. High praise indeed. Says that on a good day. Then on a bad day, it's like, So you do have to do it once, twice, maybe many times. But it's not how you start. It's not even in the mid area. It's how you finish. And finishing well is what's important. I loved the messages from the elderly people online. It made me think so much about the fact that, and I wrote this in my doctorate proposal, if you want to live, you're going to get old. And there's always this huge generational gap between old and young. And I say to my son and his peers, I don't want you to live my life. I don't want you to negate the space that you have as a young person. What I do want you to do is be mindful of the fact that one day, where I am, there you will be. Which is what Mum told me all along. Don't worry, calm it all. Yesterday, she said, I'm going to put this up for this. I said, I remember when Sister Grizzle, another founding member, was saying, I'm putting up this and I'm putting up that because Jesus is coming soon. And poor Sister Grizzle is no longer with us. So I said, Mum, whatever it is you got, use it, enjoy it. Don't put it up for another day because that day may not come. Now I've lived with too many funerals, not for any reason that I'm not blessed. It just so happens that we know so many people that we could easily be doing a funeral a week. But we're not going to go down that road. We're not here for that. I wanted to share this picture with you because this picture, to me, signifies everything that's taking place in our church, in our community, in our homes, in our schools, in our universities, out there in these mean streets. 25 years ago, I left London. I didn't know why. I just knew that when my son was a baby, even though we lived in a lovely area, I spent 10 years living in Chelsea, and then I had another few years before my son was born living in Islington, and I had no reason to believe that this wasn't a nice place to be, but something kept pressing on me. You need to get out of these mean streets. And obviously the grass isn't always greener on the other side. And I didn't know what kind of life my child was going to have. I just knew that Hackney was too close and Tottenham was too close the other way. And Brixton was just up the road. And Edmonton, which was supposed to be the place we really wanted to be, if you were in Tottenham, was no longer going to be as we had known it to be. And I just had this feeling, this energy about let's go, let's get to go. And we did. And it was the best decision I ever made because my son said, had he grown up in London, he now lives in London, but had he grown up in London, his experience and his life would have been very, very different. So this picture is a London-centric picture. It's a UK-wide picture. I'm in Nottingham. It's a small city, but nevertheless, this picture is evident of that. At the center of everything that's going on is the church. A church. Any church. And young people are sitting either side of that church, that faith group, they're in all multiple different ways now. And then above and around, you have technology, you have relationships, you have drugs, alcohol, you have all sorts of persuasions that are taking our young people hostage. The difference with my generation was that we had something called a phone box. And we had something called a home phone. And if my dad picked up the home phone and there was a boy at the end, he would simply put the phone down. That relationship was over. It was a non-starter. It wasn't even going to happen. And my son always says to me, Mum, so did you not rebel? And I said, by the time I rebelled, it was a kind of little late. You know, my dad was almost like, you're a bit old to be doing that now, really? You know, I was the safe kid. I was the kid that would just, my sister Sandra, who's sitting in the audience, a whole other story. But I looked up to her, and so there was always the danger, you know, that if she's doing it, I'm going to get in it. But I was scared of the beats. So I just tried to stay in my lane and be good. My mum said, you know, you were so good they used to just call you Goody, you know. And that was based on when you're far enough down the pecking order, you're watching what's going on with the others. And you just decide, you know what, I'll leave it. I can't take it. So I might have appeared to go, I was just scared. So the influences that I had were curtailed by community, like I spoke about earlier, were curtailed by technology being of a different persuasion, were curtailed by parents that weren't having any of it, were curtailed by all sorts. But now our young people are vulnerable. They are vulnerable in a way that if they come to church and that middle picture persists, which is everybody's looking at the front with their backs to each other, it's very difficult, and I spoke about this before, it's very difficult for someone who's vulnerable, young, inexperienced, shy, worried about themselves, worried about their environment, worried about all sorts of things, to tap you on the shoulder and say, I need help. You're going to have to get into the habit of turning around, looking around, learning their names, learning what's wrong with them, learning what they're into, learning even just to show up in their lives as an interested member of their church family. I ain't here to try get into your business, young man. I ain't here to get in your business, young lady. I ain't here to tell you what to do. Too many church people are too quick to come tell young people what to do, and you yourself not doing it. So, the reason why we have this picture that is strangling, drowning, burying our kids, it's because you stand as their universal family. Some kids are coming to church. Their mums and dads are not here. I knew, and my cousins knew, and all those lists of names that I read earlier knew that their children were lined up on the front row and lined up on the rows in front. And whether they're teenager, my dad said you could have been 6 or 60. Whilst you're under my roof, it's like this. So you would show up and you would do what my dad didn't realize, that I was just waiting him out. Because they will get big. They will get big. And no matter what you do to them, they can walk out the door. And at 19 years old, I started to plan my escape. You think I'm joking? My sister led, and I quietly planned the exit, aided and abetted by her. That's why she's my best friend. Because who could have known? Auntie Pat, you couldn't have known. The whole church couldn't get their heads around it. Not Brother Rodney's daughters. Not possible. Brother Rodney don't only run Tottenham Church. He's running the whole of the conference. He's running the whole of the south of the England. Sometimes you find he's in Wales. He's in Scotland. He's in all over. My dad was he was a pilgrim. I went to preach in Bristol Church, and I thought I'd show up and nobody would know me, and people were queuing. I know your dad. I know your dad. I went to speak in Montenegro at a stewardship conference, the keynote speaker for a week, and I sat on a plane next to a man who said, "I never forget your father." He preached in Chiswick Church in 1975 or something and talked about who's in the boat. And I never forget him. So the legacy that was embedded in us was strong. But who could have known? Who could have known that the very things young people are suffering today is the very things we were suffering with? A lack of true personal identity and relationship with God. We were born, but we weren't born again. And to be born again means you have to get into relationship. And you have to get into relationship with each other. You can't come and tell me. You have to show me. You have to engage with me. You have to be a part of me. I have to respect you enough to feel that I don't want to disrespect you. I'm going to hear you. And one of the things I said when I was leaving the church is, I'm either in or I'm out. No middle road. I ain't playing both sides. No. Because I grew up in a world where Dick Barron and Pastor Preston used to come here and say, it's heaven or hell. It's heaven or hell. You're either in or you're out. Choose a side. Because there's no room to be lukewarm. But the interesting thing is that my journey has taught me it is not heaven or hell. It's many things in between. Many. And the road to hell or the road to heaven can be long or can be short, because God is merciful. He's so merciful. I was gone for 30 years. I know I don't look that old. It's just blessed with the genes. For 30 years. I married outside, I had a child outside, and then one day, my son came home with a boy in my kitchen. And the boy said, Auntie, African boy, Auntie, I want to play professional football. And at the time, I used to work as a careers advisor in schools, colleges, and he said, what shall I do? And I said, then play. Have you been picked? Yes, Cambridge have picked me, but I have a problem. I said, what's the problem? He said, they want me to play on a Saturday. And I said, no, don't tell me. He said, what? I said, does that mean you're an Adventist? He said, yeah. And my son bounded in the room and said, Mum, I was telling him that Granddad is an Adventist and Grandma's an Adventist and my whole family are Adventists. And I sort of went, but not me. And he said, why don't you come to church, this young 15-year-old boy? Why don't you come? And I said, my son said, this is the children, we'll lead them. My son said, if you go, I will go. And I said, okay, okay, where, maybe, okay. And Samuel said, we're having a youth program next week. Would you come? And we have Friday night meetings. We want Max to come and be in the Friday night meetings. And I said, okay. And I walked in this Friday night, I'll never forget it, into the back of the church, and all the young people were there, and The pastor was there, and there was a few other people there, and all I said was my name. And suddenly, it was a whole different experience. Pastor said, "We've been waiting for you. We've been waiting for you. We heard you were in this city, this town, actually, and we've been waiting for you. We're looking for a youth leader. We're looking for a music leader. We're looking for all the things we know you have, but we were waiting for you." Their pastor had come to see me at home, and I stood on the doorstep and opened the door, and he said, "Brother Rodney's daughter?" "Yes." "Who are you?" "I'm Pastor Chisholm." "Okay. Why are you here?" "Your father sent me." I said, "Well, anything you're going to tell me, I already know." I was that bold. I was that bold, I did not let the pastor into the house. To my shame, of course. We're best friends now, of course. But the point is that journey to its heaven or its hell is marked by many different experiences. And when I went into Bedford and I saw the need and I saw my natural, we don't know. I was watching the young people up here today, and I was watching Sister Thorpe coaching them, and I was watching Sister Jingles coaching them, and I don't remember being coached. I just remember being told, "You're doing Sabbath school, you're doing Mission Story, you're doing AYS, you're up there singing with this group and that choir, we're doing this next." And you just jump to it. And I was one of those, my mum will tell you I was the quietest of the entire family. I didn't have a voice. I actually didn't really find my voice until I was about 16, 17. And then they were sort of like, "What happened? What happened to her?" Because she never ever said anything, never did anything. She was running around with Yvonne Dunwell and Angie and Jackie Cunningham and Valerie Wint and my cousins. My cousins were in church. We were in church. So it was a huge band of us. And I got to just blend into the background and let them be the upfront ones. Jackie was running the whole show. And I would just literally follow. Michelle was somewhere behind and managed to blend in. But if they said, "Brother Rodney's daughter, you did." Even if you were shaking. I remember as a tiny child being to be put on a chair. Training. All right? And if my dad wasn't there because he was always out preaching, somebody would pick you up and put you on a chair, make you deliver. 13 Sabbaths were like a day of fellowship. 13 Sabbath. There was no such thing as youth day. Youth were constantly running the show. All right? So it's a different world. But I still left church. I still left. Nobody took me out. My mum thinks my sister took me out. She didn't take me out. Whilst everybody was being loud and I was being silent, I was thinking and I was reading and I was deliberating and I was coming up with questions they just couldn't answer. They just couldn't answer. We were in the time of Nelson Mandela's incarceration and South Africans being terrorized by white minority. And my sister introduced me to the world of black politics and her peers, and I quietly started to read books. Toni Morrison, Buchi Emachita, Maya Angelou, Alice Walker, Angela Davis. I started to quietly read because all I was allowed to do was read. We couldn't go nowhere, couldn't do nothing. So always read. I don't even remember being taught how to read. My mum taught us all to read before we went to school. So when we got to school, we were in trouble. So all I knew was these books. And I remember the day I said to my dad, I was a teenager, and we used to have these big Friday night meetings, and I said to him, what about the suffering of the black minority in the UK, in Tottenham, in Broadwater Farm, in Brixton? This is prior to the riots. Very swiftly afterwards, the riots kicked out. What about the 13 dead in New Cross and Deptford? What about... And my dad didn't, as much of an activist as he was, He didn't have an answer for what was the church's response to these things. And now I look into the history, I know he couldn't have found an answer because the answers were not exactly there. He was an activist to get us out of those pits, but he didn't know from a church perspective quite what that meant. And I am at peace with that. But I knew why I left. It wasn't because of my sister. It wasn't because I had a band of people out there to take me out to go do. I didn't know how to go do. I didn't know how to party and to step it up out there. I was the geek. I didn't know how to do those things. But I left anyway. And I didn't want to come back. I didn't. And we would show up at funerals and at weddings and at special occasions, and we would sing. Me and my four sisters and my cousin. If you know June Roy Nugent, his wife Valerie is my first cousin. Her mum and my dad are sister and brother. And I now know why I left. I was angry. I was fed up. I didn't understand why my community just didn't know who I was. I'm just going, because I'm an academic, I'm just going to give you a few statistics. And I want you to just forget everything that's on that list. And I want somebody to read just that highlight, number 7. What does it say? What does the highlighted part of number 7 of that list say about why young people leave the church?
Their attendance was based only on the desire to please others.
Thank you. What's your name? Thank you, Maxine. Their attendance, shocking as it might be to reveal these statistics, and I've put the citation at the bottom for anyone who wants to look it up. Their attendance was based on what, Sister Maxine?
The desire to please others.
The desire to please others. In the Caribbean and the African and the black other community, because we are many people, we are prone to showing up. We are prone to trying to do what we think our community requires us to do. There are very few as loud and as proud and as braggadocious, as my dad used to say, as we are. We are some of the most conformist people on planet Earth. We go to the place of least resistance. We don't fight back on the things that we should be fighting. We don't step up and step out of the confines of those spaces that do not serve us. We just don't do it, okay? And I say that universally simply because it only takes one or two to say, let's do it differently. Let's do it differently, Brother Charles, let's do it differently. From this day forward, let's do it differently. Let's not be the church that has our backs to each other, that has our backs to our young people, that see and blind, hear and deaf. Let's not do it that way anymore, because the consequences are generation after generation after generation will leave. They're just waiting you out. You can push them. You can cajole them. You can agitate with them. You can tell them, get up there and do this way and that way and the other way. And they'll say, all right, all right, all right, all right, all right, I'll do it. I'll do it this week. I'll do it next week. Do it next week. You just wait till I get to uni. And the last you see of me. And then they'll come home and they're 21, 22, 23, and you better dare not talk to them. Because you didn't invest in getting to know them when they were at the most crucial period of their lives. You weren't there. You weren't there. And for those of you who are, I applaud you, because it's not easy. Young people don't make it easy for you to be connected to them. I know I got one, and my family's full to the brim. My mum and dad has basically given birth to a small country. The amount of us that are in this family. I have one child for a reason. I don't need to have any more. Do you know how many children we've got between us? It's mad. And now our children are having children. And it won't stop. So, it's not easy. And I get it, it's not. And I know it's a tough ask that you step to a young person you don't know. There's all sorts of safeguarding, worries. There's all sorts of, I don't want their parents to come tell me this or tell me that. You know, the parents can be a bit, no. And if the parents letting her wear that, what am I to say? If the parents is making him behave like that, allowing him to be, what am I to say? We are tribal. We are tribal. We need to connect to each other and step beyond the boundaries of those things that keep us stuck, those things that make us afraid. If Sister Maureen saw something on me in Holcombe Road that she didn't like the look of, she would step to me. And Sister Cunningham would pinch you. That was her favorite thing of doing. She would take you and pinch you and pull you to one side. And you best not go tell Mum, because Mum will say, Sister Cunningham, see something. It's the same eyes she has, I have. See her sit down there. So something's got to give. Something's got to give. This picture has to change. And the picture changes when we become family. We talk about, I'm so glad I'm a part of the family of God. We sing that song. I grew up on that song. Me and my sisters used to 5-part harmony on it. And my dad trained us how to sing. He was banging away on that piano. And family, if you look at the statistics, it is family and friendships. Why young people will stay. Family and friendships. And I'm going to share something with you that I wasn't sure I would, but I'm going to share it. Around 1985, somewhere around there, 84, 85, I was super young and vulnerable and in church. One day, I wake up and we are no longer in the same church. All my friends were gone. My dad had planted, firstly, a branch Sabbath school, which became a church, which then became another church. There was church at home. There was all sorts. I was confused. One day, me and Glenda and Paula and Jackie and Valerie and Yvonne and Angie and Bev and all of these people, we were in church together. And then one day, I don't know when it happened. I don't know how it happened. But I know now, something went down in church and the adults made a decision. They're going to do something different without consulting the children, without recognizing that the children were all connected. The children was what keeping that glue that was holding them together. And even though it was for a really good reason, we were spreading the message, we were growing, I never really recovered. With hindsight, I never really recovered from that break, from that fracture. So if you've got issues in your church, if you've got issues between you as adults, if there's stuff going down, listen to the bigger picture, which is who is going to be affected when I make this decision? Who's going to be affected? Because grandparents, great-grandparents, older people, they can't get up and leave. They have to stay where they are. And for those who leave and take their children with them, what about the young people, their friends who are left behind? You think they're just going to meet up in afternoon programs? Or they're just going to meet up during the week? Or they meet up on phone? Or they meet up? No, it creates a severe break in connections and could be one of the crucial, critical things that causes a young person to decide, I'm done. And while that family relationship is breaking up, whilst that is happening, you guys and me, we all still show up every week in a place with our backs to each other. We have to do better. We have to do different. Our young people came up here today and they sang their hearts out and they ministered to us and they did for us. And they've been doing that for over 50 years. I am a product of that lineup. You are a product of that lineup, whether here or abroad, whether back home or in this country. We do the same thing. I go to Jamaica, I see the same thing. I'm like, I've been in Portugal and been to church in Portugal, been anywhere I travel, and I've traveled the world. And I always try to find a church, and I look at the makeup and the setup, and I'm like, this is like some sort of set code. This is a set code. You only go to Scandinavia and see something different, where they are circular. They sit in circles quite often. This is great because this is like a semicircle practically, but usually it looks like that. So I challenge you. I challenge you, young people, to step out of your comfort zone and do some intergenerational work that makes it lighter and softer for older people to approach you, not because you're the youth leader, not because you're working with the children, not because you're working in AYS or whatever it is, not because that's who you know. I'm only going to talk to Auntie so-and-so. I'm only going to talk to Auntie Audrey because I know Auntie Audrey. And Auntie Audrey gets me when she's not there. And she can't be there forever. So intergenerationally, you need to be working with each other. And these are some of the questions I want to ask you. And I don't want to ask, we have sorry, that might be me. I don't want to, it's okay, keep moving. I'm wrapping up because I'm mindful of the time. I don't want these questions to be, do you need to do something? Okay, yeah. You might not be able to see them properly. I'm sorry, that might have been my fault. I'm not just asking them of the young people, I'm asking them of you guys too. Thank you. He just nonchalantly walked around and touched it. No sense of urgency, but that's okay. So these are the questions I'd like you to take away with you and to think about. And I'm just going to pause for you just to have a look and a think about these questions. What are the conditions that I find myself in? How do my experiences align with my attitude, my values, and my beliefs? Whose attitudes, values, and beliefs are they anyway? Are they yours? Your church family? Your children? Your peers? Whose attitudes and values are they? You need to know. I don't care whether you're 15, 14, 40, or 50, 60, or 90. My mum is a consummate learner. Every time I sit down and talk to her, I learn something new. Because her values and her beliefs and her attitude is aligned and completely in tune with her God. What do you believe in, and which principles are you willing to make a real sacrifice for? I'm a mentor, amongst many things, for some black students at the University of Nottingham. And the University of Nottingham is an elite institution. And meeting them and seeing the belief systems that they have, and able to say, hear them say, I'm a Christian, fundamentally at the end of the day, I'm a Christian, and I'm doing this, I'm doing pharmacy, or I'm doing medicine, or I'm doing law, or I'm doing accounting. But fundamentally, my beliefs and my attitudes and my values are rooted and grounded in my faith. And I work in a university outside of that I hear students all the time saying similar things. On the first day of term, I was so blessed. I wish I'd taken a picture. I saw a group of young black men holding hands and praying before going into lectures. So the story is not all bad, but you need to know the story, because the story that you're partaking in is one that is critical to whether or not they stay rooted and grounded in those beliefs or not. But I know you're doing the best that you can. I know with all of the picture that I've painted of the stuff that you have to navigate as young people, I know you're doing the best that you can. And you can rely on each other, and you can rely on many people in this room. And there is still work to be done in building relationship, because it's not a destination, it's a journey. I heard earlier this text, it's my favorite text in the whole of the Bible. The thief comes only to steal and destroy, but I came that you might have life, and you might have it more abundantly. What part of this do we not get? It's not about us. It's not about the fact that we go out in our own strengths to be able to conquer these demons called hope or despair, or just despair. We've been given this charge. I've come, I've done the work for you. Lean into me. Abundant means what? Abundant means great, bountiful, positive, treasure. It's the treasure. Jesus is the treasure we were looking for earlier in the text. That is the treasure. I would like it to be my husband. I would like it to be your wife. I would like it to be my children. But I know that when the chips are down, or whether they're up or down, it's only one person who can take the responsibility for anything to do with my hope or my despair. There is nothing that will happen, that can happen, that outside of him. So I charge you to be the light. Be the light. You are lighthouse. You are lighthouse. What kind of light are you? You in your small corner and I in mine? No. Be the light. Because Luke 11:36 says, if you are filled with light, then what? There are no dark corners. Then your whole life will be radiant, as though a floodlight were filling it with light. Filling you with light. Be the light. Be the light. Decide today that if I leave, if I can wake up tomorrow having left here today, I'm going to be a light in the lives of young people. I'm going to be the light in the lives of the disadvantaged. I love that lighthouse. Well, I come through your door this morning and you're feeding the hungry. I love that that shows up on the media as a church that's responsible, taking responsibility for others. But what about in here? What about in here? Do you know if the person you sat next to had a dinner last night? Do you know if the person sat next to you hadn't had the worst week? I try my best to be able to say happy Sabbath and mean it, but I don't always feel in it. And the Lord knows that you can't testify without your testimony. You can't testify without your test. And everybody's going through something. But I'm pleased to close by saying, but those that hope on the Lord, those that hope in the Lord will renew their strength.